Hi, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Seattle City Club Civically Speaking. I'm Alicia Crank, the Executive Director, and today I am speaking with Council Member Tanya Wu. Tanya, how are you today?
Good. Thank you for having me here today.
Well, thanks for joining me on the road. I'm sure this is a busy time for anyone running for office right now, so I totally appreciate that you're joining us from the car.
Oh,
And
I'm proud to be here.
so for those who might not know, Tanya was appointed into her current role back in January, and so now it's time for that role to now be officially elected in, which will happen in November. But obviously, we also have a primary coming up. So in this case, Tanya is the incumbent. So, Tanya, how has it been for you since you joined or was appointed to the council back in January?
Oh, it's been busy. It's been a total whirlwind, like just getting up to speed with city council and, working with my amazing colleagues who are doing phenomenal things in their district. And so it's been busy and also, just getting out into the neighborhoods. I previously campaigned in District 2, which is South Seattle, but now that this is a citywide seat, making sure that I'm in North Seattle, trying to learn as much as I can about all the different neighborhoods.
Well, I'm glad that you touched on that. I'm sharing right now some of your family history when they immigrated here over 100 years ago, kind of the different areas you've lived in. But right, you went from running for a district to being appointed to a citywide space. So it as you're venturing into North Seattle, what are you hearing and learning from people that maybe you haven't heard from your district?
Yes. So, well, I grew up here in Seattle. Seattle's my home. I have deep roots. Growing up, my family had a small family restaurant called New Temple in Wallingford. We had Seattle's first Chinese bakery, Monhei Bakery, which was in Chinatown, but also in the U District. We're also at the Seattle Center. So I had family small businesses. I was working every day after school around the city. So it was great to get to know the neighborhoods more intimately. I've done ride-alongs with the different precincts and learned like how even though the issues are very similar, gentrification, displacement will look different in South Seattle than it does in North Seattle, but they're very similar. A lot of public safety concerns, especially with fentanyl use, and then how are youth doing in the city? I mean, I feel like we have a lot of commonalities with all of our different neighborhoods. Every neighborhood's unique and different, and everyone's so proud of their small businesses and their organizations. But they're different in many ways, and so that was really interesting to learn, and I still continue to learn.
Absolutely. So let's talk about the fact that, so City Club, we ended up doing four of the seven debates last year for the election. Um, and now coming into this one. And I think what I was most surprised by was that all seven districts were up at the same time. And so, and I don't know if anyone thought that there would be such a significant changeover because of that. So you have a kind of a virtually new freshman council, and then having you come on, a couple of months later. How has council been functioning, in your opinion? With having such a significant number of new members that have come aboard.
So we all ran together and we became friends on the campaign trail. So I feel like we have a really, I tell people we have a new council. We have very similar priorities. We are very collaborative amongst each other, and we're all in person. So we constantly hop into each other's offices to talk about different ideas. And there's a sense of civility. Like we get along well with one another. We see each other every single day. We learn about each other. And so I feel like, we are working together to represent and to serve the entire city. And all of our priorities are very similar, like public safety, how do we build more housing and affordability? And of course, how do we tackle the budget deficit and the comprehensive plan, the transportation levy? And so I feel it's an exciting time. There's collaboration, there's coming together, there's agreement, and the sense of working together to get things done for the city.
And you just transitioned into my next question was about those priorities, be it public safety, homelessness, and affordability. I know are your top three. What is one specific action you would like to see happen? And I base that question really on honestly what's been happening recently. We know that there's been the shakeup again in with the police department in public safety. We know that there's the homelessness projects have hit walls across the everything, especially with King County, and then just kind of affordability with the fact that I would say that you can say that affordability is subjective, right? So how so if all so they all have their own different sets of tangents and issues, but from your perspective, out of all of these, what is one thing that you would love to see happen around one of these before the end of the year?
Yes, I think one thing that's top of mind. Last night there was a 14-year-old who was shot and killed about 5 minutes from where I lived. You know, we are coming fresh out of the school session with the shooting at the Garfield High School. And so one very specific action that I would love to see is more programming for our youth, for our young people. I know the mayor has just rolled out his $10 million plan for more mental health access. But I think that's something we need to focus on, because if we can keep our kids safe, our families will be safe, and our communities will be safe. So I think we need to focus on that next generation of looking at how do we help with economic mobility? How do we help these young people have entrepreneurship opportunities, apprenticeships, trades, but being able to focus on their passions? I'm the Arts and Culture Committee chair. How do we facilitate that amongst our community? And so I think for me, one thing I would love to see happen is more programming for our youth, more activities for our youth. And, we're just starting summer and school's just gotten out. So we'll love to see more communities coming together, programming for our young people coming together, more involvement by our young people, especially.
So again, you tangented into my next question, which I love. So we're talking about your roles on the different committees. So I know that you're the chair of the Sustainability, City Light, and Arts and Culture, and a number of other committees. Which one right now is kind of, is there something going on in either of these right now that you feel like the public at large needs to know about, needs to make sure that they're paying attention to based on what you're working on?
Oh, there's a lot of things. I feel like I could probably do something in every single one, but just
Okay.
I'll start with sustainability. We have our my biggest focus is trees. We're not hitting our tree canopy goals at 30%. Um, and so, especially looking at, what happened last year with the tree ordinance, looking forward to see how we can protect and save our trees and be able to plant new trees going forward, being able to build and plant trees, I think is very important. How do we hit our conservation targets? And especially, how do we do that outreach and engagement with communities who may not speak English as their first language, refugee immigrant communities, know about these rebates, exceptions to help electrify their homes, but just connecting people to government resources. When it comes to City Light, this is a rate setting year, so we're going to be starting those discussions as well as part of the strategic plan. I'm really excited about being the chair of the Arts and Culture Commission as a dancer, as a theater person, and my family are very involved in the arts. I have singers and painters in my family, and so we have started the creative economy roundtable, basically working with the Office of Economic Development, talking about how we can lift that ecosystem, lift that community, not only in downtown's core, but also in our neighborhoods, and bring that prosperity to the entire city, especially ahead of FIFA soccer.
Yeah.
Something I am really delving into is how to build more housing, especially how to build more affordable housing, because that's my background. I helped develop my family's historic building into workforce housing. And so I'm looking at different legislation, looking at, how do we offer that incentive to build affordable housing at MFTE, MHA, other incentives, density bonuses, looking at air rights, looking at density bonuses for trees, and that nonprofit developer incentive to be able to build and to build easily throughout the whole city, not just in certain areas. Um, and how to be allow that without having to use city, state, or federal funding, but using exemptions, tax credits to be able to do that. And so that's something I'm delving into. And these pieces of legislation take time because sometimes a SEPA is involved or studies are involved. And so that also ties in with, we have the comprehensive plan that
Right.
we will see in a couple of months, that council will see in a couple months as well. So really delving in and making sure that we're able to build more and to allow for building more affordable housing in all parts of the city.
Yeah.
And that's something that's really, really fun and interesting for me. And you also know that the transportation plan or the transportation levy is in council right now, and you'll see it before voters in November. And so, how do we come up with a great plan, once in a lifetime investments to build more sidewalks, to focus on the basics and that infrastructure of bridges and especially promoting safety, getting closer to our Vision Zero targets, as well as building bike lanes. So that's something that's going on right now that I really highly recommend people get involved with. And I know libraries is a huge concern. And so how do we allow for more programming, more hours,
Mhm.
especially within our capacity as the Seattle City Council, in areas where we may not have much purview in, like mental health, housing, and homelessness. So I think you may have know that during the pandemic, I started a group that we go into encampments, we offer mutual aid, we offer meals, we try to connect our unhoused neighbors to resources. But with that viewpoint of my experiences, being able to help, with housing and homelessness, basically, and how do we do the outreach? How do we build that trust? Something I'm working on is how to expand resources. The mayor just made an announcement about expanding the care team, but I would love to see more expansion of teams like Lead of the Care, Reach. How do we get these groups into areas and neighborhoods that they're not in, such as Chinatown International District, 12th and Jackson, where we see this huge explosion in people, um, using and selling fentanyl, and in South Seattle, North Seattle, in different areas on the Ave. How do we allow for more safety ambassadors? I think is really interesting to me as well. So hopefully that answered your question.
No, it did, and it's a lot, and I love that it's a lot. And one of the things that it made me think about is our next question, which is, as candidates, and I've been a candidate before in the past, your priorities and what you think you want to do versus what happens once you're elected can be two completely different things. I didn't get elected, but I'm sure that, you know, what I thought what I wanted to do versus what the reality is was could sometimes be two completely different things. So as you have been on the council for these past few months, have you seen any of your priorities shift or expand since you started serving on council, just based on, okay, now I'm in the room and now I see more and hear more?
Yes, thank you. That's a great question. So I think my main priorities have stayed the same: public safety, housing, affordability, and then bringing my lived experiences on council. But the one thing that has surprised me is learning about the government process, what is possible, what is not possible, the time frame, and trying to learn how to work the system to be able to focus on priorities. But at the same time, we get hundreds and hundreds of emails and phone calls a day. Being able to continue that community engagement, so we're not sitting in our office all day, we're out in community, we're listening to people. And so I think it's really important that we're serving the public, we're out in public. Not only are we in office, but we're in community, and that we are available to community members. So like last night, there was a shooting that happened near my home. I made sure I went out there at 10 p.m. at night. And when I was out there, I was talking to neighbors, like trying to see how I can help. What do you think the city can do to help the neighborhood heal? And it's sometimes you hear tough things. People feel like, especially last night with that young person who was shot, that the city has failed them. And the only time they see the city or they see police officers is when a tragic event happens. So now I'm taking this experience and thinking about making sure that we're doing that outreach, that engagement to our community, that we're listening. Because another thing I heard was, the city imposes policies and they expect it to work, but they're not talking to people or asking people what they really want and what they really need. And this gentleman was like, look around, all these new buildings around this neighborhood, we don't have access to them. Our kids don't have access to use them. I'm trying to do some programming here, but I'm running up against a lot of walls. And so going into community and listening and taking that back and learning and trying to figure out how to implement and make that work is something I am continuously learning, especially as a small business owner working with the business community, and how do we, rise people up economically and close that wealth gap is something I'm really interested in as well. And so learning at ways, we can help the small business communities in terms of permitting, in terms of like city help. And so it's been quite a journey.
Yeah, and I'm gonna say you already answered my next question, which is going to be what's been your biggest challenge or lesson learned since your time on council? And I think what you just shared just hits the nail on the head. Is being able to allow for access and say, okay, this is not as black and white that maybe you hoped that it would have been.
Yes. And so I think just learning, how the process worked, learning patience in in you know permitting and getting your questions answered and working with the different departments. um, City council has oversight, but we don't have direct asks with certain departments. You have to go through the mayor's office.
Yeah.
And so that was something I was really interesting to learn, and how to get things done. If someone has an issue, how do we navigate the different channels to get to the right person to be able to address a very specific issue? Was something that was really interesting. Another thing that I found exciting was how, as a citywide council member, how do we work with our different district council members, especially working together. There was a shooting in West Seattle, so working with Councilmember Saka, and when he's doing his outreach with his community, I was in Fremont and was hearing about concern from people in Fremont about what happened in West Seattle. So there's a lot of connections, and a lot of commonalities, and people are talking about incidences that happen in different districts in different cities. So how do we address that working with the council member from that district, but citywide? Something I learned, that I'm continuously learning, is zoning out. I ran in District 2, but now I'm citywide. That looks very different
Yes.
than I had thought. And so making sure that, these allowing for district council members to be involved, but looking at how this looks in different parts of the city with the uniqueness of every single neighborhood. And growing up here has been really fascinating because, I know the different neighborhoods, I know the different areas, but getting to know them more intimately and getting more involved in how do we enact change. And especially growing up as, a person of color in Beacon Hill, in the Chinatown International District, in an immigrant, refugee community. How do we do that government outreach to these communities? How do you make sure that these opportunities and resources are available to non-English speakers? Something I'm acutely interested in is, when I was in a different role as an advocate, going into council chambers and realizing that, council members, in terms of translation, it only goes one way towards council members. The community had no idea what was going on during council meetings. They weren't getting these translation services. So that's something my office is really focusing on, is making sure that, more of our communities have access to government, know what's going on, and know how to get involved and get resources.
I believe that you are in a very unique position, and this is kind of be my last question to you before we wrap up. And it does come off of what you just said too, around you know the fact that you're a woman of color that ran for this office, then got appointed to it, and might get elected into it officially later on. And I think for women, for marginalized communities, um, running for office is stressful more than it is for the average person because there's a lot more scrutiny. And so sometimes that scrutiny will keep someone from even thinking about running for office. I've been there, I know it. And I think about in your case, and especially I think one of the things that was, a topical thing that was being talked about during this whole process was you know, the voting record, right? And I think that there's a lot, but I also think that there's a lot of younger people, a lot of those from marginalized communities that did not, participate in the voting process as most people did as well. And so that will usually be seen as a deterrent, like, oh, you can't run or you can't win because your voting record's so small. And it's not a super unique thing among certain communities. So that being said, so being in this role and kind of being able to get over that hurdle of the voting record issue, how are you encouraging other residents to become more civically engaged in the city, within their neighborhoods, in whatever group, especially if there are those folks that feel like they will be instantly disqualified because they don't fit a certain pattern?
Yes, it's I will admit my voting record has not been great. I'm I grew up in Beacon Hill. I live in Rainier Valley now. I'm deeply rooted in the Chinatown International District, and there's 4,000 people who live in the Chinatown International District, 2,000 which are seniors, and that community does not vote because working in a small business, going to my family restaurants growing up, like we were just so focused on just trying to survive, trying to stay afloat, that I mean, unfortunately, we don't see government very much in our lives. Chinatown International District is one of the poorest communities in Seattle, also one of the most endangered neighborhoods in the nation. And so I think just trying to let people know that we have a voice, that's how I got into this space, got into this work, was looking around in the Chinatown National District, see what's happening, with our residents, with our in-house neighbors, with what was happening on 12th and Jackson, and realizing, we need to speak up, we need a voice, and bringing people in the city council chambers, bringing people in King County chambers, letting you know that this is our perspective, we want to see at the table, has, I think, really helped in terms of getting people more civilly engaged, looking around their communities. And so I think just making that connection, when the pandemic started, we saw that, people were afraid, especially in the CID. There was a lot of stereotypes, especially, during COVID, there was like COVID Kung Flu, and people thought they could get COVID from eating at a Chinese restaurant. And so that area was just a ghost town. No one came down there. And so a lot of people would go in there. There were a lot of windows broken, a lot of looting. And so many of us, strapped on our masks, and we went out there and we started, safety ambassadors. We started walking around building trust. And I think, just having young people see what the need is and to do something is very important. When we saw there was a lot of anti-Asian hate incidences in my community and our seniors were so afraid to come out, they would come out in groups and walk around a parking lot for exercise and then go back up into their rooms. And, how do we help our elders? How do we help our seniors? We immediately started senior escorts. We immediately started, going to the senior community, doing self-defense classes, situational awareness classes. So my encouragement to young people is just, you can do it. Do something. You see that there's a need. There's an elder who needs help. Just go ahead and start. Just start very small. You see that, there's community safety concerns in your neighborhood, just start walking around, getting to know your neighbors, let them know that you're here, build that trust, build that hope. And, especially now, how important, we just had, the Trump versus Biden debates. There's a lot at risk here. We need to be civilly involved. We need to vote, and we need to get everyone involved to vote, because there is just, scary what our future could be.
Absolutely.
So we have to make sure that, we are able to stay the course and build up our communities, unite people, and work hard. So my plea is, please get involved. Like, you see there's a need, please help and do something. But most importantly, there's a lot of misinformation out there. Just stay, being able to, read and be involved in terms of staying abreast of media. So I think, yeah, that's, you have to vote to be able to be heard, to be able to get your issues across, to have a seat at the table. And that's something that has been happening in our communities now, especially in immigrant refugee communities, is how do we let our seniors know, our communities know that this is the best way to get a seat at the table and to be heard, is to be able to vote. And for me, growing up in the Chinese community, very lucky to have an amazing mentor, Auntie Cheryl Chow. I grew up with her, and seeing her on the Seattle City Council back in the early 2000s, late 1990s, made me realize that I could do that too. I could see myself in that position too. And so having amazing mentors growing up, like Auntie Cheryl Chow, Auntie Ruby Chow, who's on the King County Council, really helped me, inspire me to dream and to believe. Because as you said, during the campaign trail last year, many people were like, yeah, no way a Chinese person is going to be on the council. I don't believe I'll ever see that again.
Wow.
And so I think that's why I feel it's really important to go back in the community. Like, I mentor and I volunteer for the Seattle Chinese Community Girls Drill Team. And I used to teach dance. And so being out there talking to young people, especially I've been visiting, Boy Scout troops, which is not just Boy Scouts anymore, it's for everybody. And encouraging people to just get involved with their neighborhoods, but especially get involved civically and come to chambers and learn about the process. It's very exciting what you could do in your community.
I love it. Councilmember Wu, thank you so much for taking time to meet with me today. I've learned a lot from this conversation. I'm sure others will as well. Good luck with your campaigning. And I'm sure we'll see you sometime after the primary in one capacity or another. But thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and your views on what's happening with council.
Oh, no, thank you for having me here.
Okay.
See you
And thank
soon.
you everyone for listening and or watching. And we'll come back soon with another Civically Speaking. Take care.